Hello and welcome back. This will be my first video covering the non-punctuation concepts that you're going to see in the ACT English. If you haven't already seen my videos on punctuation and general ACT English overview strategies, I'd recommend you go back and watch those. Otherwise, this is the place to start. Again, we're going to be going pretty quickly, and these concepts are going to be organized based on whatever I think is A, tested most frequently, B, easiest to pick up so you can cover it very quickly, learn it very quickly, and then you're good. So the things towards the end are either going to be very rare or they're going to be very advanced, whereas the things up front will either be very common or relatively easy to learn. So without further ado, let's get going. The first thing we're going to cover are apostrophes. And you might be thinking, aren't apostrophes punctuation marks? Why didn't we cover those in the punctuation section? Well, that's because, yeah, technically you're right, it is a punctuation mark, but the ACT punctuation questions, or what I refer to as punctuation questions, will often have you choose between the other punctuation marks. Whereas the questions that have anything to do with apostrophes don't usually have any other punctuation having to do with them. You just have to know, do I want an apostrophe? Do I not want an apostrophe? If I do want one, where do I want to put it? So with that, let's figure out what we do with them. Apostrophes can be used for only two things: contractions and possession. Contractions are when you have two words, you push them together. And you're just going to try and throw away some letters to make it shorter. The apostrophe is going to let you know that's where some letters were cut out. For example, look at the word its. That is just it is squished together with an I taken out, so that apostrophe is saying, hey, we took out a letter here, and the space between the two words. Possession, by the way, I'll cover on the next slide, but that's indicating that something is owning or possessing something else. That doesn't have to be legal possession, but it can just say it belongs to that first word. Now, for contractions, some words are going to have a contraction form, and they're also going to possibly have a possession form. First thing you have to figure out is, does a contraction form of that word exist? If it does, then that's what the apostrophe is going to be used for. So if you see essentially the same word, or at least pronounced the same way, and it could be possession, or it could be an apostrophe, or it could be a contraction, the apostrophe is going to be the contraction. So in these cases, there's going to be just a totally different form of that word with no apostrophe at all to indicate possession. So let's see an example of that. Whose. That's a contraction of who is. So therefore, if I need to have possession, it's going to be whose, W-H-O-S-E. It's a totally different spelling of the word. So because this contraction exists, that's what the apostrophe is going to be used for. Let's see another one. Their. This is a contraction for they are. So if we want the possession version of this word, it's there with an E-I, totally different spelling. Again, the contraction takes priority for the apostrophe. Now, what if there isn't a contraction form of that word? In that case, the apostrophe is going to be used for possession, and that'll be all it's used for. And you're going to see it either as apostrophe S or S apostrophe. And that's going to depend on whether or not the thing that's owning something is singular or plural. Technically, it could also be a does it end in S, but the ACT is not going to test that, or if they do, it's extremely rare. Usually they're trying to figure out, do you know about the singular or plural rule? So, apostrophe S is what we're going to use if it's singular. And again, when I'm talking about singular or plural, I'm talking about the thing that's doing the owning, that's owning something else. So here's an example. In this case, I own one dog. So the sentence would be, I need to pick up my dog's toys. So in this case, there's only one dog that's owning the toys. So it's going to be apostrophe S. Notice, toys is plural. That doesn't matter. All that matters is how many dogs am I talking about. If it's one, it's apostrophe S. Let's look at the same example, but in this situation, I'm talking about two dogs. And in the ACT, you would have to know from context. So you'll have to read around it to figure out, are there multiple things that it's talking about. If I do have a plural situation, it has to be S apostrophe. So in that case, it would be I need to pick up my dog's toys, with it being S apostrophe, because I'm talking about two dogs that are owning these toys. Again, toys is plural, doesn't matter. All that matters is how many dogs are owning anything. I want to point that out one more time. It does not matter if the thing be owned, aka toys in this case, is singular or plural. All that matters is the thing that's doing the possessing or the owning. Another thing to keep in mind, plural words without possession are not going to have an apostrophe. Those are trick answers or wrong answers they're going to throw in there. You're going to get so caught up sometimes that you're trying to figure out, is there possession, is there not possession, is there a contraction, that you're going to forget that there are just plural words out there. Like in this case, I have two dogs. And I'm not going to have an apostrophe anywhere to just say that there are multiple dogs. If there's no possession and no contraction, there will not be an apostrophe. Moving on to the next thing, some contraction examples. I'm going to have a few more examples of this than others because there are very specific sets of contractions that the ACT loves to test, and I can almost guarantee you're going to see at least one of these on every ACT or at least every other. So the first are going to be all of the different forms of its. So this version, its with no apostrophe is possession, which I know is confusing because normally apostrophe means possession. But again, there is a contraction version of this word, and since there can be a contraction, the possession is not going to have the apostrophe. So an example of that, the tree lost its leaves. So the tree in this case is owning the leaves, so I'm going to use no apostrophe. Here's that contraction I was talking about. It is. So in this case, it's time to start studying. The apostrophe goes before the S to indicate I'm taking a letter out here. It is time to start studying. Those are technically the only two versions, but you're going to see another answer choice in there. And every time, whenever I'd quiz my students that were first coming out, I'd just write three versions up and ask them to figure out what each one does. And this next one would always stump them. That's its with an apostrophe after the S. It's never the right answer. That's not a thing. It's completely incorrect. It's just thrown in as a false answer to confuse you. The nice thing is, that means you can eliminate it immediately whenever you see it. Next set, the different versions of there. THERE indicates location. So for example, I left my calculator on the table over there. If you can point to a spot and say there, that's when you want to use THERE for location. Next, we have the contraction version. THEY apostrophe RE for they are. In this case, that indicates I'm getting rid of the A. So let the contractors do their job. They're the professionals. They are the professionals. Finally, THEIR, that's the possession version of this word. An example of this would be the students aced all their tests. That should be tests with an S. Oh well. And in this case, the students are owning the tests. So there is possession. Last set of common contractions, would've, could've, should've. These all mean would have, could have, should have. In this case, I'm getting rid of the HA in all of these. There's going to be another answer choice that many students choose that's wrong. That's what it sounds like, because if you say would've, for example, it sounds a lot like would of. That's going to be your other answer choice. Would of, could of, or should of. That is not what this word means. It's would have, could have, should have. These are grammatically incorrect. Moving on to the next very common question type, and it's also really easy to identify. You wouldn't go in thinking this is something they test, but once you know it and you start seeing it, they're extremely easy to get. And you don't want to miss these because they're basically free points. And these are conciseness questions. Conciseness, by the way, if you don't know, just means keeping things short and brief. So how will I know I have a conciseness question? Well, look at your answer choices. You're going to see repetitive answers that are all saying essentially the same thing. Some of them are just really wordy, and one of them is going to be a lot shorter than the others. Guess what? That one's the answer. Generally, use the fewest number of words needed. That's what conciseness is asking for. You just want to be very careful to avoid being vague. That's the only exception, and they will test this. If the shortest answer is vague, meaning it cuts out a lot of detail or gets really non-specific and you don't know what they're talking about, like if they just say, this is stuff, that's vague. Pick the answer at that point that will actually give you the most specific answer. So if the shortest one just says stuff, then start looking for the answer choice that actually exactly tells you what that stuff is. It's probably not going to be the shortest anymore, but that one's going to be the right answer. If you happen to come across what definitely looks like a conciseness question, but there seems to be a longer answer that you just really think has some important information that's getting cut out in the shorter answer, pause for a second. They love to do this trick where they actually already told you that information in the passage in a different sentence. It might be earlier in the sentence, it might be earlier in the paragraph, it might be a little higher up on the page. So you actually can cut it out and choose the shorter answer because it's just repetitive to tell you that information again. So do double check if you happen to think you're getting stuck on a conciseness question because you don't want to get rid of what you think is really important information.
So let's take a look at an example of a conciseness problem. Now before we even take a look at the sentence, let's just take a glance at the answer choices here. And immediately you can see we have a very long answer, a very long answer, a pretty long answer, and then one that's a decent bit shorter than all the others. So right off the bat, that's a really good hint that I'm probably looking at a conciseness problem. It's not a guarantee, still check and make sure there's not other grammar rules at play, but it's a very good indication that that's what you're working with. So now let's go and look at our sentence. Several paintings can be found at more than a small number of places and museums that celebrate historical periods ranging from 1500 to 1600. That is a mouthful, and you might think, who on earth would write like this? There's no way this is on the test. That's exactly what a lot of these, not all of them, but a lot of them sound like, where it's just absurdly wordy, with more than a small number of places and museums. That is vague. Why are we listing two places with one being vague? More than a small number is a lot of words to say. That's a lot. So these are the kind of things to look for that tell you we probably have conciseness. So let's look at our answer choices. And again, if you haven't seen these before, the underlined section is what you are replacing with your answer choice. So for B, we have a lot of museums and cultural sites showing materials from historical periods and eras from 1500 to 1600. So just as long, we still have a lot of museums and cultural sites, so we have two places now, so it's more specific. We don't have just places, so it's a little better there. A lot is better than more than a small number, but now we have periods and eras, and it's just really long. Let's keep going. A large number of art museums showcasing paintings from the years 1500 and 1600. That's a lot better at this point. It's a lot shorter, and it still is saying the exact same thing. And then there's D, several museums showcasing paintings from the 1500s. That is still giving the exact same information. It's not vague, because we still know we're talking about museums. There's no extra info up here that we're losing. It's not just saying locations or areas. It's still saying museums. So it's not vague, and it's concise. That makes it our best answer. It's really not that hard. You just want to take a look and make sure you identify these because they're free, easy answers if you know that's what they're testing. It's just not a typical thing that you would think would be tested in an English section for the ACT.
Last one for this video, objective questions. How will I identify those? They're normally going to have phrases such as which of the following, which choice best does something, or given that all the following are accurate, blah, 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 blah. If you see a phrase like that, you've got an objective question. What are they going to do? It's the name. They're going to give you an objective that your answer has to accomplish. They want to know what answer best does something. You only care about accomplishing that objective. Don't try and plug them in and say, okay, which one sounds the best, which one flows the best, which one's most relevant to what's going on in this essay. They are not testing that. Figure out what is the objective, what do they want your answer to do, pick the one that does that. Let's look at an example. Which of the following best indicates the arrangement of the trees? Now, obviously, you don't have the essay in front of you here to know what's going on with the trees, what are they talking about, because that doesn't matter. You're going to be tempted to try and test that. Doesn't matter. I know this is an objective question that says, which of the following? Well, what is the objective? What do they want my answer to do? They want it to indicate the arrangement of the trees. So let's look at our answer choices. A, the giant green trees. That tells me their size and their color. Does it tell me their arrangement? No. B, the rows of trees. That tells me how they are arranged. So that one's looking pretty good. Doesn't tell me their size or color, but I don't care about that. C, the ancient fruit trees. It tells me what type of tree. It tells me how old they are. Again, nothing to do with arrangement. And D, the fruit trees and the ornamental trees. Well, this points out I have different types of trees. If the essay is actually talking about several different types of trees, a lot of students might be tempted to go with this one because they think, oh, that's what's relevant. But that's not what it's asking you to do. You only care about the objective. So the answer here is going to be B. That's the only one that asks or answers what is the arrangement of the trees. Another really important thing to point out, and this is why I put it right after conciseness, if you have objective, don't worry about conciseness. You only want to worry about what is that objective. Because notice, this is the shortest answer, but that is not why I chose it. If they ask which one tells you what different types of trees you have, the answer would be D, even though it's the longest.